Hello and welcome to this introductory video on color blending, and we'll be using the Giotto colored pencils from Italy for this lesson. So the first thing that I like to do with the colored pencils is just to lay them out according to the color spectrum. So I'll usually leave the pink out, but then I'll take the rest of the colors that are saturated and I'll group them together, as well as uh, the black and brown. And this gives me a color spectrum. So I start with, I'll actually make 9 divisions here. So I'll split this into thirds and then into thirds again, so that I actually have 10. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 lines, and I believe I have, yeah, 9 pencils, and I'll have one on both ends. So I usually put the magenta on the left side and the right side. I'll just make a little bar for each of these colors. Magenta, red, orange, yellow, the light green, or as it's called in this pack, just green. And then there's emerald green, followed by sky blue, and then regular blue, or as it's called in this pack. It's a little bit more purple, but ultramarine blue and purple. And as I said, I'll finish off the spectrum with the magenta. And one exercise that I like to do with the spectrum is to take the colors adjacent to any color. So rather than taking red, taking the orange and magenta, rather than taking the green, taking the yellow and the emerald green, rather than taking blue, taking sky blue and purple. Might actually do that on another card. Uh, let me lay that out real quick. So I can put down just really quick lines, which I probably should have done for the other example too, but I think it'll be nice to have larger gradients. And what this exercise does is it shows really what the most saturated colors are, or the colors that can mix the widest gamut of other colors. And again, I'll wrap the spectrum with magenta on the other end. So I'll use magenta and orange. To make red, and I'll use the orange and the green to try to make yellow, and I try to match the value. It's really hard with yellow just because of how light yellow is, but I'll generally try to color lighter for the lighter tones. And now green and sky blue. I'll probably end up calling this green yellow green throughout the video, so just bear with me. Then mixing blue with sky blue and purple. With any of these spectrum exercises, it definitely helps to keep your pencils in order of the spectrum as you work, just to stay organized. And I'll try to make orange with red and yellow, and again I'm using the red lighter. I still went a little bit too dark, but trying to match the value. Same thing here, using the green and the ultramarine blue lightly or lighter. And I have one left, so I'm actually going to add another bar of red over the edge so that I can try to make magenta using red and purple. And from this little exercise, I can see that I get a good orange from red and yellow. I get a good green from yellow and green. I get a good blue from sky blue and purple. And I get a good red from magenta and orange. However, I do not get a good sky blue from green and blue. I do not get a good yellow from orange and green. And I do not get a good magenta from purple and red. And these are the colors that printers would use. So the cyan, magenta, and yellow. So those are the colors that I'm going to use. Here. And I might actually just mix each of these squares. Back again using just magenta, yellow, and sky blue. Now I'll grab just those colors and push the rest aside for the moment. So with just magenta, yellow, and sky blue, I can make the colors in between. So the red falls between yellow and magenta, so I will use yellow and magenta, and it's closer to magenta. So I'll use magenta. You see that I get a respectable red from magenta and yellow. And then I'll use the magenta lighter for the orange. A little bit more magenta. Just a touch. So I'm trying to match, mostly I'm trying to match the value, the lightness or the darkness of the orange. So there I have the red, the orange. I'll continue on with the greens. I think that was a little bit too much blue. For the light green, and I actually find the greens to feel a little bit more chromatic when they are mixed with the yellow and sky blue. It's not showing up on the video as well, uh, but they generally have a nice color vibration to them. Are a little bit more livelier. Uh, they feel more saturated than the the green pencils. And then for blue, I just need a touch of magenta. And then a lot of the sky blue. Or cyan. That's pretty close to cyan. So a printer would use cyan, magenta, and yellow. And that's essentially the colors that I'm using here. So it's the closest thing to the print gamut. Now I'll do a similar thing. The purple in the pack actually comes out pretty weak, so I am going to use quite a bit lighter pressure on the magenta and the sky blue, just in an attempt to better match the value, the lightness and darkness of that purple. And that is the cyan, magenta, yellow gamut. And below that, I will use the traditional primaries, the red, blue, and yellow, or in this case, ultramarine blue. So it's a little bit more purple, but it'll just show the contrast between these two gamuts a little bit more clearly. So I have red, yellow, and blue. And between each of these, so red, would also be wrapping around the edge here. I'll do the same thing that I did before using the colors on either side to mix the colors in between. I used significantly too much blue. My value is going to be way darker on these greens. And then for the sky blue, again, since that's out of gamut, I'll just color lightly with the blue and then use a little bit of yellow in an attempt to fake or approximate a sky blue. But you can see that it's significantly less saturated. There's quite a bit of color loss there. And then the light green has a lot of yellow, the dark green a little bit less. And this is what I was saying about this blue having quite a bit of purple in it. So this blue is leaning toward purple, and purple is the complementary color of yellow, and so it ends up getting muted. I'll mention more about complementary colors in a moment. But for now, just note that the greens here are significantly less saturated than the greens from the cyan, magenta, yellow gamut. One thing that does come through a little bit stronger, might be a little bit hard to see here, but the orange is actually a bit stronger here because the magenta, again, is leaning toward purple, complementary color of yellow, and so this orange is a little bit less saturated. It's hard to tell on the camera here. And similar to the sky blue, I'll just shade lightly with red and maybe take a little bit of blue, not a whole lot, but just something to cool the red a bit. But that also makes it lose a bit of saturation. So if I were trying to, approximate that magenta, I'd probably just use a light red rather than trying to mix in any blue. The last one is this purple, which the blue should actually, this blue should be helping us to get a better purple, but the red is significantly closer to orange. And so it's going to be a more muted purple. There you go. And those are the two most popular color gamuts. I'll draw them out again, but this time as continuous spectrums rather than just matching colors. I'll make the full spectrum for each. Again, right down the middle of the card, I'm going to put all of the colors. So let me organize my pencils again real quick. Red, orange, yellow, light green, dark green, or the yellow green, blue green, sky blue, blue, purple, and magenta. So now I have my spectrum again. So I'll put red, orange, yellow, green, green, the yellow, green, blue, green, sky blue, ultramarine blue, purple, and magenta. And I should have started a little bit larger on the left side, but I'll just wrap the red around to this side. Perfect. Now I'll do the print primaries. So magenta, I'll just pull up a line for magenta. I'll pull up a line. Yeah, that works. So magenta, a line for yellow, and a line for sky blue. I'll take the magenta and shade that from dark to light. Wrapping towards yellow, and then from dark to light going towards sky blue. And I'll take the sky blue and shade from dark to light toward magenta, and then dark to light toward yellow. And the final thing is to take yellow and shade dark to light toward the blue, and dark to light back toward magenta. Okay, so again, this is the cyan, magenta, yellow color gamut. And now I will do that again, but with red, blue, yellow. So I'll drop down my lines for red, for blue, and for yellow. And again, I'll shade the red from dark to light toward the blue, from dark to light toward the yellow, and then the blue from dark to light toward the red, and from dark to light toward the yellow, and finally finishing out with the yellow. So here you can really see the difference in these color gamuts. That in the cyan, magenta, yellow color gamut, we have a really nice sky blue, a really nice magenta, uh, and all of the colors are actually very well represented. I guess I could have used a little bit more pressure here to make a richer blue. But essentially, all of the colors are relatively well represented here. Whereas in the red, blue, yellow color gamut, it is significantly less saturated. We lose the magenta, we lose the sky blue, and we lose also the purple. So there's definitely a saturation loss there. So right here, the gamut is quite a bit weaker, and also the greens. So we have a loss of information here as well as a loss of information here. But that comes with its own benefits and drawbacks. Since most people learn the primaries, the traditional primaries, I'll mention the traditional primaries, primary colors and secondary colors with uh, with their complementary colors. I'll mention the traditional primaries first, so red, yellow, blue. And as we saw in the exercises, we can actually just make these little pie shapes a little bit wider. But we can use red and yellow to make orange. We can use blue and yellow to make green. And we can use red and blue to make purple. So I usually do start out with the darkest colors first. So make a little triangle here and a little triangle here on either side of blue. So this is going to be the blue mixing with the red and the blue mixing with the yellow. And then I'll make a little triangle here for the red mixing with the yellow. And then a little bit over the blue. And then finishing out with the yellow. So I have made purple with blue and red. Now I'll make orange with red and yellow. And I'll finish off with the green made with blue and yellow. And the interesting thing about this wheel is that the colors that are opposites they are called complementary colors, and if they are perfect complements, if I mixed an orange that is the perfect complement of this blue, when I color blue over, it should neutralize that orange perfectly. It should just be a shade of gray or black. It should not lean toward, in this case, it should not lean toward red or yellow at all. It should just be a neutral, as well as the purple. If I take some yellow, and this is a little bit harder with the yellow since the yellow tends to remove a bit of value, but the same thing is true of the yellow. Yellow and purple, they should also neutralize each other, and the red and green. And this is essentially what the model that I have running in my brain as I am trying to mix color and shift a color in any specific direction. I'm thinking about if I need something that's more neutral, then I will think about the complement and try to pull that way. So if I have a really saturated orange and I need it to be a less saturated orange, I can mix some blue in with that. If the orange is too red, then I know that I can mix some yellow with that. And I'll mention a little bit more about actually working with the gamut later. But for now, I'll do that same color wheel, but with cyan, magenta, and yellow. And the really interesting thing about this primary, these primary and secondary colors, is that cyan, magenta, and yellow are the print primaries, and the print secondaries are red, green, and blue. Which are the primary colors for screens. So uh, if you're working on a screen with RGB color space, you'll be using the secondary colors of print as your primaries, and vice versa. And the same thing is true. I think that my red is not quite red enough. But the same thing is true of this wheel. That I should be able to take sky blue over the red, and that should neutralize the red. Should be able to take magenta over the green, and that should neutralize the green, and I should be able to take the yellow over the blue, and the same thing. That should neutralize that color. And now I'll do a little sphere study. So I'll just try to shade a gray sphere. Might do a gray sphere and a brown sphere with both gamuts. And I'll start out with the easier one. So since the red, yellow, blue, since the red, yellow, blue gamut is significantly less saturated, that means that it's going to be easier to actually make those neutrals. Rather than spheres, actually, I'll just grab out these neutrals again. So I have black. I'll just make a little gray box. And a little brown box. I could have done this up here had I thought I had a bit more, since this is out of since it is a representation of all of the pencils in the box. All right. And I usually start with the darkest colors whenever I blend, so I'll use the blue first, followed by the red, and then just a touch of yellow. And this is where having a really dead purple is really helpful for color mixing of neutrals. And most of the colors that you'll actually make in a painting will be subdued and neutral. So the traditional wheel, although it is quite a bit less saturated, it is also easier to think through as far as the primary and secondary colors, since it's the model that's taught in schools, and it's also quite a bit easier to actually use for making all of the neutrals common in most paintings. So it ended up going a little bit dark. But you get the idea. I think I can darken my brown a smidge, and then it'll be about right. Sweet. And now I'll do that same thing, but this time using the sky blue and magenta. I should have mentioned that the gray, for the gray I'm just trying to mix as even a purple as I can, because once I add the yellow, I don't want it to, if it's too blue, it's going to shift green. If it's too red or magenta, it's going to shift orange. So I just want to make a really solid neutral. I don't want it to be really leaning toward either color. I think this needs to come a little bit more blue, and then I'll use a bit of yellow to neutralize. It's a little bit, looks a little bit too cool, a little bit too blue. So I'll add a bit of magenta. And this is where making color mixes with pencils is a little bit more difficult, because every time that you make an adjustment, your color gets darker. So you really only have um, one shot at the mix, and then once it goes past, once it goes too dark in value, then you kind of just have to start over with a new exercise. This one, I know that I want it to lean toward magenta, so I'm using a bit more magenta than blue. This is a little bit too neutral. Needs to come a little bit more toward orange. Yeah, and that's the basics of mixing color with two of the most popular gamuts. Of course, the red, blue, yellow is the one that's used most often and taught in most schools, and is valid for most paintings. So anything that you're doing that isn't highly saturated, you can get away with just these colors. But if you're doing a painting that has a lot more saturation, it might be worth it to actually use the cyan magenta, yellow. So with this gamut, it's a lot harder to actually uh, pull the colors back toward a neutral, but it is much easier to actually get those really strong saturated colors, um, especially if you need, really good purples and really good, uh, if you need really good purples and like a sky blue in your painting. Whenever I did plein airs, I would actually have a tube of a sky blue, just so that I could actually get that color when I was on location. And the final thing, I think the most challenging thing that I'll show as a final exercise is shading from dark to light with gray or with black. Oh, I actually should have done this with blue, but this will be fine. And then shading back the other way with brown. Might actually grab the blue and do this again right below that. I'm going to make a gradient from blue to brown, from cool to warm. You can see that in the middle here, this becomes a neutral. This becomes a perfect, almost a perfect gray. And what that tells us, based on this color wheel, if we mix brown with blue and it hits a perfect gray, that means that the brown is just a darker, less saturated orange. And that's how I'll think about brown as a color. And now I'll do that same thing. To make a target to aim for the traditional color wheel, or the traditional color gamut as well. And just so that it matches the one above. Okay, now I'll take that uh, sky blue, or the cyan, magenta, and yellow, and try to recreate this transition. And the colors that I choose are the colors that I could grab like paint swatches from a hardware store. I could grab images and try to match bits from images, but this is just easiest for me since I have the whole pack of pencils. I might as well use all of them. So is this all color really dark? With the sky blue, and then lighten up on the side and try to hit that really good blue with that mixture of sky blue and magenta. And I should mention that computers use one more color for printing. So you do see how much lighter this gamut is. Then this gamut, printers will use cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. So CMYK, the K is for black. Cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. But usually when I'm drawing and using the CMY wheel, I don't generally find myself needing to reach for a black as I can get pretty dark with just the uh, magenta and the sky blue, or the magenta and cyan. Okay. So as I said, this is a harder gamut to work with for mixing neutrals. So I would expect this red, blue, yellow to go quite a bit faster, especially since I have just regular blue right here. So I can start the exact same way, although I will let the blue stay a little bit darker as it goes across than I did the first time, since the orange is less saturated. And what that means is that the orange, for it to be less saturated, the orange has more blue in it. It has more of the complement to neutralize it. And again, this almost looks uh, like that gray, or really close to that neutral gray, just because of how unsaturated the purple is by mixing the red and the blue. I think I went a little bit too blue. Here, actually, I lost a little bit too much of the warmth, a little bit too much of the orange. So, like I said, with the colored pencils, it's really easy to accidentally go too dark, but I think that came out along pretty well. And I can always, since my source wasn't actually as dark as it could have been, I can come back in and darken my source so that it looks closer, since I'm more worried about matching the color Nice. Great. So that is a little intro to color theory using these Italian pencils. So let me know if you have any questions, and happy coloring.